Keanu Reeves was in the midst of a lively charity gala, surrounded by friends, fans, and flashes of cameras. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and chatter. Yet, among the noise, one face caught his attention, one that seemed so familiar it almost stopped him in his tracks. It was her. Ms. Clara. Keanu hadn't seen her in decades. The woman who had cared for him like a second mother when he was just a child, the woman who helped shape his early years. She had been there during his formative moments, offering comfort, discipline, and love in a way only a caretaker could. But now, at 85, she stood in front of him, surrounded by strangers at the event. His heart skipped a beat. Was it really her? Ms. Clara? Keanu called out, his voice cracking with surprise. He couldn't believe his eyes. The woman turned, her face lighting up with the same warmth he remembered, though the years had added more lines to her face and grey had begun to touch. Her hair, her smile was still unmistakable, and her eyes still carried the same kind maternal glimmer. "Keanu?" she said, her voice thick with affection, just like it had been all those years ago. She took a step toward him, and for a moment, everything else around them seemed to fade away. Keanu felt a rush of nostalgia flood his chest. He hadn't expected this, not here, not now. As he approached her, he could see the slight tremor in her movements, the wear of age in her step, but she was still standing tall, strong in her own way. "Ms. Clara, what are you doing here?" Keanu asked, the words almost slipping out, before he realized how rude they might sound. He instantly regretted it, but couldn't stop the flood of questions rising in his mind. "Oh, Keanu, look at you," she laughed, a genuine chuckle that made her eyes sparkle. "You haven't changed a bit. You look just as handsome as I remember." Keanu's smile faltered as he watched her. She was always full of life, but now there was something different. She wasn't just here as an attendee. There was a heaviness about her, a weariness that Keanu couldn't ignore. It was then that he realized. Ms. Clara, the woman who had been there for him through thick and thin, was still working, still trying to make ends meet at 85 years old. Keanu was taken aback. He had been so wrapped up in his own life, his own success, that he hadn't even thought to check in on her after all these years. The realization hit him hard. She was the one who had been there for him during his childhood, when life was uncertain, when his parents were struggling. She had been a constant in his life, and yet, here she was, still working, still giving her time to others. He wanted to ask her why. Why was she still working at her age? Why hadn't she retired long ago and lived the peaceful life she deserved? But he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. Instead, he watched her, his mind racing. "Keanu, I'm just here helping out. You know me. I've always enjoyed staying busy," Miss Clara said, her voice warm. Though there was an underlying tiredness to it, Keanu stood there feeling conflicted. She had always been humble, never asking for anything in return. But this wasn't right. How could he let her continue working like this? She had given so much to him, raised him, nurtured him. Yet it seemed like she hadn't asked for anything back, except maybe a little peace. What could he do to help her? Before he could ask, she gently patted him on the arm, interrupting his thoughts. "Don't worry about me, dear. I'm just happy to see you all grown up and doing so well." But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. His heart felt heavy, and a deep sense of guilt washed over him. This wasn't just about a reunion, it was about doing something meaningful. What could he do for the woman who had given him everything? Have you ever been surprised to see someone from your past years later? What would you do if you discovered they were still working at an old age? Share your thoughts below. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling of unease as he walked away from the charity gala. The image of Ms. Clara, standing there at 85, still working tirelessly, replayed in his mind. How could she still be doing this after all these years? She had given so much to him, so much more than anyone could ask for. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, mixed with guilt and confusion. Why hadn't he done something sooner? As the night wore on, Keanu found himself sitting alone in his hotel room, lost in thought. He leaned back in the chair, his fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the edge of the table. His thoughts wandered back to his childhood, those days when Ms. Clara was more than just a nanny. She had been a second mother to him, a guide through the chaotic ups and downs of growing up. He remembered the early mornings when she would wake him up, her gentle voice calling his name softly, making sure he was ready for school. She had a way of calming his nerves before big tests or auditions, a way of making him believe in himself, when no one else did. She taught him lessons, not just about the world, but about kindness, patience, and understanding. But it wasn't just the big moments he remembered. It was the small ones. The way she always seemed to know when he needed a comforting word or a warm meal. The long talks they'd have at the kitchen table, where she'd listen to his thoughts, offering wisdom and support, even when he didn't deserve it. Keanu's parents were often absent, caught up in their own lives, and Ms. Clara had been his anchor. He remembered how she would stay up late, waiting for him to come home from a late-night shoot, making sure he was okay, even when he was already an adult. She'd always been there for him, steady and unwavering. But now, looking back, Keanu wondered, had he ever really thanked her? Had he ever shown her how much he appreciated the sacrifices she made for him? He had gotten lost in the whirlwind of his career, his fame, his life, and he had taken her constant support for granted. Now, he was painfully aware of how much he owed her. Keanu's mind kept drifting back to the way she had looked at the gala, her tired eyes, her worn-out hands, and that faint, almost imperceptible sigh when she spoke about still working. It was as if she had accepted this as her life's fate, never once considering that someone might step in and help her live the life she deserved. As he sat there in his hotel room, Keanu knew one thing for certain. He had to do something. He couldn't just go on with his life, forgetting the woman who had given so much of hers for him. He had to find a way to repay her, to show her that she was more than just a caretaker. She was family. And family deserved to be cared for. Keanu's heart tightened as he thought about her, still working, still giving. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just thinking about his own success. He was thinking about hers, about the life she had led and the way it had been shaped by her love for him. With a deep breath, Keanu stood up and walked over to the window. The city lights sparkled outside, but inside his mind was focused. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could change the future. He picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. He could call her, offer her help right now, but it didn't feel like enough. No, he needed to do something bigger, something that would give her the rest, the peace, and the comfort she had earned and deserved. Keanu sat back down, his resolve growing stronger. I can't let her keep working. Like this, he thought. She deserves so much more. What role did an important person in your life play in shaping who you are today? How do you show your appreciation for them? Share your thoughts in the comments. The days after the gala were a blur for Keanu. He couldn't stop thinking about Ms. Clara, her smile, her warmth, but also the exhaustion in her eyes. He replayed every moment they'd shared that night, analyzing her words, her movements, trying to understand how she had managed to work so hard for so long. He had seen her at 85, still managing that small local bookstore she had worked at for as long as he could remember. But what truly disturbed him was the fact that she never once complained. Not once had she asked for help or even mentioned how tired she must be. In fact, she had brushed off his concerns with a wave of her hand, a small, gentle laugh. But Keanu knew better now. He had come to realize that Ms. Clara wasn't just working for a paycheck. She was working because she didn't know how to stop. It was as if her entire identity had been wrapped around the idea of giving. She had given so much of her life to raising him, to taking care of him when no one else would. And now she was giving more of herself just to survive. Keanu couldn't stand the thought of her still struggling, but at the same time he couldn't ignore the guilt eating away at him. How could he have let it go on for so long? He had made a name for himself, amassed a fortune, and yet Ms. Clara was still toiling away in that small bookstore, never asking for anything. The guilt weighed heavy on his shoulders, but as he sat in his hotel room staring out at the city lights, he realized that this wasn't just about guilt. It was about responsibility. She had shaped so much of who he was, and now it was his turn to shape her future. Keanu knew he had to visit her, to truly understand her situation. He had to see for himself what was going on behind the scenes. He needed to know what she was going through, what she needed, and how he could help. The next morning, he drove to the bookstore. As he stepped out of the car, he could already see her through the window, standing behind the counter, carefully organizing the shelves. Her back was slightly hunched, but she moved with the same quiet determination he remembered from his childhood. There was something admirable about the way she carried herself, despite her age. He hesitated for a moment at the door, taking a deep breath. How do you even begin a conversation like this, he thought. But he didn't have to worry for long. As soon as the door opened, Miss Clara's head snapped up, and her face broke into a smile. "Keanu, what a surprise. What brings you here?" she asked, her voice light and cheerful, though Keanu could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "I thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing," he said, forcing a smile, though his heart was heavy. "It's been so long since we've talked, and I just wanted to check in." Ms. Clara beamed at him, as if she hadn't noticed the tone of his voice. "Well, you're always welcome, dear. I'm doing just fine, you know. Keeping busy as usual. How's everything with you? I see you're still living the dream." Keanu couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She wasn't going to ask for help, he knew that. But he had to ask, had to know if she was truly okay. "Ms. Clara, are you really okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "I mean, is all this work? Is it really what you want to be doing at 85? She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Keanu, you know me. I've never been one to sit around. I love books and I love meeting new people. This little shop, it's been my life's work. But I'm just fine, really. I've been doing it for years and I'm still standing." Keanu stared at her, his mind racing. She was clearly lying, either to him or to herself. He could see the fatigue in her movements, in the way her hands shook ever so slightly as she reached for a book. "Ms. Clara," Keanu began again, a little more firmly this time, "I want to help. I want to make sure you're not still working like this. You've done so much for me. It's time I do something for you. Let me take care of you, at least for a little while." For a moment, there was silence. Miss Clara's expression faltered, just slightly. She looked down at her hands, then back at Keanu. "Keanu, dear," she said, her voice soft and gentle, "I don't need anything. I've never asked for anything in return. I've always been happy doing what I do." Keanu took a step closer, his voice sincere. "But you deserve better than this. You don't need to keep working like this. You've spent your whole life giving. Now it's time to take a break, to enjoy what you've earned." She shook her head again, her smile returning, though it was tinged with sadness. "I appreciate you, Keanu. I really do. But I don't want to be a burden. I've never needed much. I've always been content with what I have." Keanu knew she would say that, but he couldn't let her continue to struggle in silence. "I'm not letting you do this alone, Miss Clara," he said, firmly. "Please let me help. Let me give you the rest you've earned. You've given me everything. The least I can do is help you live the life you deserve." For the first time since he'd arrived, Miss Clara's eyes softened. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, Keanu saw the cracks in her resolve. "I suppose," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper, "maybe it's time for a change." Keanu smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Miss Clara. I promise you won't regret it. Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone you cared about needed help but they didn't want to accept it? How did you handle it? Let us know in the comments." The following weeks were filled with change, and Keanu couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He had made a promise to Miss Clara, and now it was time to keep that promise. But he knew that offering help wasn't as simple as writing a check or giving her a few days off. It was about more than that. It was about giving her the space to relax, to step back from the work that had defined her life for so long, and to find joy in something else. Keanu's mind raced as he considered the best way to help. He knew she would never accept anything. That felt like charity, so he needed to come up with a plan that didn't just focus on financial support. He wanted her to feel valued, to feel like she had a future beyond the bookstore, a future that was hers to shape. It was one evening, after a long conversation with his team, that the idea hit him. It was simple but powerful, a way to honor Ms. Clara's lifelong love of books and people. He would open a new chapter of her life, one that would allow her to continue doing what she loved, but in a way that didn't tire her, a way that would lift her spirits and bring her joy. The idea was to create a book club, one that wasn't just about reading, but about connecting with people, sharing stories, and creating a community around the things that mattered most to Miss Clara, her love of books and her passion for nurturing. Others, Keanu made plans to approach Miss Clara with the idea. He wanted it to be something she would feel proud of, something that would allow her to step back from the daily grind of the bookstore, but still remain a vital part of the community she had helped build. It didn't take long for him to get in touch with her. He called her up one afternoon, asking her if she'd be willing to meet. There was a slight hesitation in her voice, but she agreed, and soon they were sitting together in a small cafe that they both loved. Keanu could sense the curiosity in her eyes as he shared his idea. He knew she was skeptical, but he also knew that she respected his sincerity. He started by explaining how much she had meant to him throughout the years and how her role in his life had shaped his career and his success. "Ms. Clara," Keanu said, leaning forward, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for me and for others. You've given so much, and I feel like it's time for you to have a life that's just for you, something that allows you to keep sharing your love for books, but without all the stress of running the bookstore day in and day out. So I came up with an idea." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "What if we start a book club, a place where people can come together, read, discuss, and just enjoy being around each other? You wouldn't have to do all the heavy lifting anymore, but you could still be the heart of it, helping to organize events, selecting books, and creating a space for people to connect." Ms. Clara sat back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. Keanu could see the wheels turning in her mind. She didn't speak right away, and Keanu waited, giving her the space to process. "It sounds lovely, Keanu," she said softly, "but I don't know if I'm ready to give up the shop completely. It's been my whole life. I've always loved it." "I'm not asking you to give it up," Keanu replied. "You can still be involved in the community, but without the stress of running everything by yourself. Think of it as a way to pass on the torch, while still leaving your mark. Plus, I know how much you love bringing people together." Ms. Clara looked at him, her expression softening. There was a long silence, but Keanu didn't mind. He could tell she was considering it, weighing the options in her heart. "I suppose," she began, her voice filled with uncertainty. "It could be nice. I've always wanted to create a space for people to connect, to share ideas. I never thought of it like this, though." Keanu smiled, feeling a surge of relief. "I'll help you with everything, Ms. Clara. You don't have to do this alone. We'll make it something special together." Ms. Clara's eyes shone with a mixture of surprise and hope. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" "More than anything," he said firmly. "Let's make this happen. Have you ever had a moment when you realized you could help someone start a new chapter in their life? How did it feel to be a part of their journey? Share your thoughts with us in the comments." The excitement of their meeting lingered in the air for days. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation, imagining what it would be like to see Ms. Clara step into this new chapter of her life. A part of him knew she was hesitant, still unsure of fully letting go of the bookstore that had been her lifeblood for so long. But another part of him knew she had the spirit of someone ready for a new adventure, someone who just needed a little push. Over the next week, Keanu put his plan into motion. He contacted several of his close friends who were well connected in the literary world, authors, book critics, and even some celebrities who had a love for reading. He wanted to make the book club special, a place where people from all walks of life could feel welcome. He didn't want it to be just another club. He wanted it to be something that resonated with people on a deeper level, just as Ms. Clara had done for him all these years. He called Ms. Clara again, this time to outline the first steps of their plan. "All right, I've made some calls," Keanu began, his voice excited. "I've lined up some authors who'd be interested in joining us for our first event. They're eager to meet the people who've been part of this community for so long. And I've also been in touch with a local cafe that's willing to host our meetings. It's cozy, intimate, perfect for our first gathering." Ms. Clara was quiet for a moment, and Keanu could almost hear her weighing his words. "Keanu, this is all moving so fast. I'm not sure I can handle all of this." "You don't have to do it alone," Keanu reassured her. I'll be there with you every step of the way. All I need from you is your expertise, your love for books, and your ability to bring people together." There was a long pause, and Keanu could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I don't know, Keanu. It's a big leap for me. What if people don't show up? What if it's a failure?" Keanu understood her fear. It wasn't just about the book club. It was about taking that first step into an unknown future. It was about trusting that something good would come from it, even if the road ahead was uncertain. "I promise you, Ms. Clara, this won't be a failure. You've given so much to this community already. People love you, they respect you, and they will show up. You've made such an impact on so many lives. Now it's time for you to let them show their appreciation in a way that's meaningful to you." Keanu's words seemed to resonate with her. She let out a soft sigh, then said, "All right, Keanu, let's do it. Let's give this a try." With that, they were off. Over the next few weeks, Keanu and Ms. Clara worked tirelessly to organize the first meeting of their book club. Keanu arranged for the cafe to host, set up social media pages to promote the event, and made sure to personally invite the people who had been a part of Ms. Clara's life, those who had worked with her, those who had frequented her bookstore, and even a few celebrities who had supported her over the years. As the date approached, Ms. Clara's nerves started to show. She was still hesitant, still worried that it might not be as successful as Keanu believed it could be. But as the day of the first meeting arrived, something incredible happened. The cafe was buzzing with excitement, and when Keanu and Ms. Clara arrived, they were greeted by a crowd of familiar faces, and even a few new ones. It was clear that this wasn't just a book club. It was a celebration of Ms. Clara and everything she had given to the community over the years. People were eager to see her again, to reconnect, and to be a part of something that had the potential to change their lives. The event began with an informal gathering where Keanu spoke about the history of the bookstore, the impact it had on him, and how he wanted to honor Ms. Clara by creating this space for others to experience her kindness and wisdom. "And now," Keanu said with a smile, "the floor is yours, Ms. Clara. We're all here because of you." For the first time in a long while, Ms. Clara's face lit up. She stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd be standing here, sharing my love of books in this way. But here we are, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I hope this book club becomes a place where we can all come together, not just to read, but to share our stories and support one another." The crowd applauded, and Keanu could see the joy in her eyes. It was clear that, despite her initial fears, this new chapter was exactly what she needed. The first book was chosen, a classic novel that had always been one of Ms. Clara's favorites. The discussion flowed effortlessly, with people sharing their thoughts, feelings, and personal connections to the story. As the evening wore on, Keanu couldn't help but notice how at ease Ms. Clara had become. She was no longer the tired, worn-out woman who had been chained to her bookstore. She was now the vibrant, beloved woman who had created a space for others to thrive. By the end of the night, Ms. Clara looked at Keanu with a tearful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think I could do it, but you were right. This was exactly what I needed." Keanu smiled back. "I'm just glad I could be here to help you find it. You've given so much, Ms. Clara. Now it's your turn to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Have you ever helped someone step into a new chapter in their life? What was the most rewarding part of that experience? Share your story with us in the comments." The first few months of the book club were a whirlwind of success. Ms. Clara, despite her initial doubts, had blossomed in the role of organizer, mentor, and friend. The members of the club were not just regular attendees, they were her family, a group of people who valued her wisdom and loved her for all the years she had given so selflessly. And Keanu couldn't have been prouder. As the book club continued to grow, the community around it grew stronger too. People from all over the city started hearing about Ms. Clara's book club. They heard about the intimate gatherings, the warmth of the discussions, and the way everyone was welcomed with open arms. The cafe that hosted them was thriving, and the town began to feel the buzz of excitement as word spread. But as with any successful venture, Challenges soon began to surface. The growing popularity of the book club meant that the small cafe could no longer accommodate the number of people attending. The cozy, intimate atmosphere they had once cherished was starting to feel crowded, and finding enough room for everyone became a logistical nightmare. Keanu and Ms. Clara knew they would have to find a new venue, but the thought of moving away from the cafe they had grown so fond of weighed heavily on both of them. Keanu sat with Ms. Clara one afternoon after the latest book club meeting, and they discussed the issue. "I think we've outgrown this place," Keanu said, his tone thoughtful. "It's been great here, but the space is getting cramped and we're starting to turn people away at the door." Ms. Clara frowned. She had grown attached to the cafe. It wasn't just the venue, it was the memories they had built there. "But this was supposed to be our little spot," she said quietly. "Where will we go now?" Keanu could see the hesitation in her eyes, and he understood. The idea of change wasn't easy for her. She had spent so many years in the familiar confines of her bookstore, and now here was another transition she had to face. "I know it's not easy," Keanu said gently. "But the good news is that we've built something incredible. The growth is a testament to how much people care about what we're doing here. We've created something special. We just need to find a bigger space, one that's still intimate and welcoming, but that can handle more people." "I know," Ms. Clara replied, her voice thoughtful, "but I don't want to lose the personal touch we've had here. The conversations are what matter most, not just the size of the room." "I agree," Keanu said. "We'll find somewhere that works. We'll make sure it's still personal, still warm, still about the connections we've built." But as they discussed their options, another problem began to rear its head. As the book club expanded, it started drawing attention from more than just the community. Bigger publishers, bigger companies, and corporate sponsors began taking notice. Offers of sponsorships flooded in, each one with the promise of more money, more resources, and more exposure. Keanu was torn. He had always been a strong believer in keeping things simple, real, and grounded. He didn't want the book club to lose its charm, to turn into something commercial and impersonal. But on the other hand, the offers were tempting. With more money, they could offer more events, bring in bigger authors, and maybe even create a permanent space for the club. One evening, after another heated discussion with his team, Keanu called Ms. Clara. "I've been thinking a lot about the sponsorships we've been offered," he said, his voice uncertain. "They're great, but I'm afraid it might change what we've built here." Ms. Clara listened intently. She understood his hesitation. "Keanu, I've always believed that people should be the heart of what we do, not the money. I don't want us to lose that either. But maybe there's a way to find a balance. We could accept the support without letting it take over." Keanu was quiet for a moment, reflecting on her words. She was right. There had to be a way to maintain the integrity of the book club while still growing it. After all, the club had always been about more than just books. It was about community, connection, and making people feel seen and heard. But they needed to make sure those values remained intact. "I think you're right," Keanu finally said. "We can find a way to make this work without losing what makes the club so special." They agreed that they would carefully vet any sponsorship offers, ensuring that they aligned with the values of the book club. The focus would always be on the people, the discussions, and the heart of the community. In the meantime, they found a new space, a small local theater that had just opened up. It had a cozy, vintage feel with rows of comfortable chairs and a stage that could be used for author events and talks. The atmosphere was perfect, and best of all, it had enough room to accommodate everyone. The move to the new venue was bittersweet. As they packed up and prepared for the transition, both Keanu and Ms. Clara couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic about leaving behind the cafe that had been their home for so long. But there was a sense of excitement, too. This was the next step in the journey, and it felt right. The first meeting in the new space was a huge success. The room was filled with eager faces, and the energy in the air was palpable. The intimacy of the smaller gatherings was still there, even with the bigger space. People gathered around tables, books in hand, and the discussions flowed just as they always had, warm, heartfelt, and real. Keanu and Ms. Clara stood together at the front of the room, watching the club members connect with one another. And for the first time in a long while, Keanu felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped create something that would last, something that would continue to grow and bring people together for years to come. And Ms. Clara, standing beside him, was beaming. For the first time, she wasn't just a caregiver. She was a leader, a beacon of warmth and wisdom for so many people, and it felt like the beginning of something even bigger. Have you ever faced a challenge while growing something you were passionate about? How did you handle the changes that came with it? Share your experience in the comments below. As the months passed, the book club continued to thrive. The new venue had brought a fresh energy, and the attendance numbers only increased. The events were becoming more dynamic, featuring live readings from best-selling authors, themed book nights, and even book swaps that brought members closer together. Keanu and Ms. Clara couldn't have been happier. The community was growing and so was their bond, but as with any success, cracks began to show. The growing influence of the book club began attracting more attention from outside forces. Corporate sponsors, wanting to ride the wave of its success, started pushing harder. They saw dollar signs in every event, and while many of their ideas seemed tempting on the surface, Keanu began to worry about the direction the book club might be heading. One afternoon, as they prepared for another meeting, Keanu sat down with Ms. Clara to discuss the latest proposal from a major publishing house. This offer could be huge for the club, Keanu began, his brow furrowing. They want to sponsor an entire series of events, pay for the authors, cover all the expenses, and provide us with extra funding to expand. It would mean even more exposure, more books, more everything. Ms. Clara listened carefully, but Keanu could sense the hesitation in her expression. "That sounds great," she said slowly. "But I've always believed that this book club was about the people, not the money. We've built something real here, Keanu. I don't want to risk losing that just to gain a bigger following." Keanu nodded, his mind racing. He shared her concerns but couldn't ignore the potential for growth. However, the more he thought about it, the more he realized she was right. The book club was never meant to be a corporate project. It was meant to be a community, a sanctuary where people could come together and share a love for literature without any strings attached. "I've been thinking the same thing," Keanu admitted. "But it's a lot of money, Clara. We could do so much more with the resources they're offering. I just don't want to feel like we're turning away something that could benefit everyone." Fizz. Clara placed a gentle hand on his, and for a moment there was only silence between them. The weight of the decision was heavy, and both knew that they couldn't take it lightly. "I understand," she said softly, "but we've worked so hard to build this space. It's about the people. It's always been about the people. I don't want the club to lose its soul for the sake of profits." Keanu was quiet for a moment, then looked her in the eyes, finally coming to a decision. "You're right. We've already built something amazing without all that extra funding. If we start taking money from the wrong people, it'll change the heart of what we've created." Ms. Clara smiled, relieved that Keanu shared her vision. "I'm glad we're on the same page. Let's focus on what's really important, the connections, the stories, and the joy of reading." They agreed to politely decline the offer, despite the promise of all the financial benefits it brought. Instead, they decided to take a different approach to the club's future, a grassroots strategy. They would focus on fostering organic growth through word of mouth, encouraging the members to bring friends, while offering a selection of free or affordable events that everyone could enjoy. But things didn't go as smoothly as they'd hoped. The moment they turned down the sponsorship, they faced resistance from some unexpected places. A few of the more prominent members of the club, people who had been there from the beginning, began to voice their concerns. Some questioned why Keanu and Ms. Clara weren't taking advantage of the offers that were coming their way. One evening, during a book club meeting, a heated argument erupted between a longtime member named Carol and Keanu. Carol, who had always been an enthusiastic supporter of the club's growth, stood up, her voice sharp with frustration. "I don't understand why you turned down that offer, Keanu. This could have been the opportunity we've been waiting for. We could have brought in bigger authors, had better events, and reached a wider audience. Why are you trying to keep this club so small? Are you afraid of success?" Keanu's eyes narrowed as he tried to maintain his composure. It's not about being afraid of success, Carol. It's about keeping the heart of what we've built here. We can't let sponsorships or corporate interests dictate what this club becomes. But we're running out of space, Keanu, Carol retorted. The meetings are packed and people want more. You're being stubborn and it's starting to hurt the club. Ms. Clara, who had been quietly watching the exchange, stood up and intervened before the situation could escalate further. Carol, I understand your frustration, but we're doing this for the right reasons. This book club isn't just about growing big, it's about staying true to what we stand for. We want to be a place where everyone feels welcome, not a place that's driven by money or corporate sponsorship. There was a tense silence. Carol's face reddened as she stood her ground, but it was clear that the words had stung. She shook her head and crossed her arms. I guess I just don't see it the same way. If you want this to stay small, fine, but don't expect the rest of us to keep supporting something that won't grow. With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving a palpable tension hanging in the air. The rest of the group exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what to do next. Keanu stood there, feeling a lump form in his throat. It hurt to see someone who had been such a big part of the community walk away, but deep down, he knew they were making the right decision. The book club had always been about connection, not commercialism, but the fallout was harder than he had anticipated. Ms. Clara stepped up beside him, her voice soft but firm. This is the test, Keanu. This is where we see if the people who truly believe in what we're doing will stay by us. And I think they will. Keanu nodded, still processing the weight of the conversation. I hope so. I just don't want to lose the people who helped us get here. I don't think we will, Ms. Clara reassured him. We're stronger than that. Have you ever had to stand your ground in a situation where others didn't? Understand your decision. How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. The fallout from Carol's departure lingered in the air for weeks. Though most of the book club members remained loyal, the tension in the group was palpable. It wasn't just about the sponsorship offer anymore. It was about the very essence of the club, the community they had worked so hard to build. Keanu and Ms. Clara knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to holding on to what made the book club special. Despite their internal struggles, the club's popularity continued to grow. They had added more events to their schedule, including private book signings, author panels, and community book fairs. Slowly but surely, the loyalty of the core members began to outweigh the discord that had been sown. Yet, as with all things that grow, there were new challenges on the horizon. One evening, as Keanu was preparing for a major book event at the theater, he received a phone call that would shake him to his core. It was from a private investigator, someone he had hired several months ago to help dig into the past of the anonymous benefactor who had helped Miss Clara when she needed it most. Mr. Reeves, I have the information you requested, the investigator's voice was steady and calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension in his words. And I think you'll want to hear this in person. Keanu's heart began to race. The mystery surrounding Ms. Clara's past, the mysterious benefactor who had helped her through the toughest times of her life, had always been a shadow that hung over their work together. Keanu knew there was more to the story, and he had spent months searching for answers, but now it seemed the truth was about to come to light. Where can we meet? Keanu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The investigator gave him the address of a small nondescript cafe on the outskirts of town, one that Keanu had never visited before. With a sense of foreboding, he hung up the phone and immediately made his way there. When Keanu arrived, the investigator was already waiting for him. The man looked ordinary enough, mid-40s, dressed in a smart but unremarkable suit, but there was something about him that made Keanu uneasy. The investigator led Keanu to a corner booth and slid a folder across the table. Take a look at this, the investigator said, his eyes scanning the room before meeting Keanu's gaze. The information I found is unexpected. Keanu opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the documents inside. It didn't take long for him to realize the gravity of what he was seeing. The papers detailed a long-forgotten part of Ms. Clara's past, one that she had never mentioned, a former connection to a major publishing company, a company that had its fingers in several influential media outlets. But the most startling revelation was about the identity of the benefactor. Keanu's mind raced. The documents indicated that the mysterious benefactor who had helped Ms. Clara had not only been connected to the publishing company, but had also been involved in a high-profile scandal years ago, one that had cost several people their careers. There were whispers in the papers, dark rumors about shady deals and business dealings that went awry. The investigator had uncovered that the person who had financially supported Ms. Clara was, in fact, someone with a complicated, possibly dangerous history. Keanu's chest tightened as he processed the information. Was it possible that someone with such a past had really been Ms. Clara's savior? How could she not have known who she was really relying on? What would this mean for the book club, for their reputation, for everything they had worked so hard to build? "Are you sure about this?" Keanu asked, his voice strained. The investigator nodded. "I've cross-checked all of it. The documents, the old news clippings. It all matches up. This person has a history, and it's tied directly to Ms. Clara's financial support." Keanu leaned back in the booth, trying to process everything. The mystery of Ms. Clara's past, of her secret benefactor, was something that had never fully made sense to him. He had always assumed it was a simple act of kindness, but now it felt like the foundations of everything they had built were shaking beneath him. He needed to tell Ms. Clara. But how? As he left the cafe, the weight of the new information settled heavily on his shoulders. He didn't know what to do with it yet, but one thing was certain. Everything was about to change. Tuan. Next day, Keanu called Miss Clara. They agreed to meet at her home in the late afternoon. He had rehearsed what he would say, but as the time grew closer, he found himself doubting his ability to bring up such a sensitive topic. When he arrived, Miss Clara greeted him with her usual warmth. She didn't know that her life and the community they had worked so hard to build was on the brink of unraveling. "Keanu, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, ushering him inside. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and there was a comforting coziness to her home. Keanu sat down across from her at the kitchen table, his mind still racing. "Clara, there's something I need to talk to you about," Keanu began, his voice steady but his heart racing. "I've learned some things about your past, about the person who helped you when you were struggling. I think it's time you knew the truth." Ms. Clara's expression shifted immediately, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "Keanu, what are you talking about?" Keanu took a deep breath. "I hired someone to investigate the benefactor. And Clara, the person who helped you, the one who gave you all that financial support, has a very complicated past. They were involved in a major scandal years ago, and their connection to a publishing company has a dark side. It's not as simple as it seemed." Ms. Clara's face went pale as the words hit her. She looked down at the table, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want anyone to know, but you're right. I should have told you sooner." Keanu reached across the table, taking her hand. "I didn't want to hurt you, Clara. But I think we both need to face this. There are forces at play here that could affect everything. The book club, your past, and all of us." Ms. Clara looked up at him, a mixture of fear and resolve in her eyes. "I never meant for any of this to come to light, but I have to face it now. We have to face it." Keanu nodded, knowing that this would be a turning point. The book club, their mission, and their vision for the future were now in jeopardy. But together, they would figure out how to navigate the storm ahead. Have you ever had to confront a truth about someone close to you that shook everything you believed? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts below. The days following Keanu's death. Conversation with Ms. Clara were heavy with uncertainty. The truth about her mysterious benefactor was out in the open now, and both of them knew it was just a matter of time before the book club would face the repercussions. Every decision they made from this point on would be weighed by the knowledge that their very foundation was built on a secret they hadn't shared with anyone. Keanu couldn't stop thinking about the implications of the investigators' findings. The publishing company, the scandal, the shady connections, it was all too much to ignore. And yet Ms. Clara's actions had always been pure, her intentions good. She had never asked for the help of the benefactor to grow her own power or for personal gain. She had simply needed help when she was at her lowest. Sitting together in Ms. Clara's kitchen that afternoon, Keanu knew they had reached a crucial crossroads. The book club could either continue to grow and thrive, or it could crumble under the weight of a truth that was hard to digest. "Never wanted you to be in this position," Ms. Clara said softly, her voice tinged with regret. She sat across from Keanu, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "I should have told you the full story from the beginning, but when you're running on empty, sometimes you just do what you can to survive. I needed that help. And when I got it, I focused on the good it brought, on the hope it gave me. I didn't think about what came before." Keanu watched her carefully, his own emotions a mix of sympathy and caution. He knew that her actions were out of a place of survival, not malice. Yet the truth still held power, and power could corrupt, sometimes in ways that were impossible to predict. "I get it, Clara," Keanu said after a long pause, his voice calm. "I know you didn't ask for the past, and I also know that the book club we built is about people, about helping each other. But now we have to decide what to do with all this. The truth is out and we need to confront it." Ms. Clara took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that a lot, and I know that I can't change the past, but I can choose how to move forward." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes intense with purpose. "We both can. We don't have to let this define us, but we need to be honest with the book club, with the people who've supported us. If we don't, it could tear everything apart." Ms. Clara sat back, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "But what? If it's too much for them to handle? What if they can't see past the scandal, the connections? What if they turn away?" Keanu's eyes softened. "We have to trust that the people who believe in what we've built will stay with us. It's not about the past, Clara. It's about the future we create from here on out. We've shown people what the book club means to us and to them. We've shared our love for literature, our love for connection, our commitment to this community. That's not something a scandal can take away." There was a long silence, and then Miss Clara looked up at him, a mixture of determination and fear in her eyes. "Then let's do it. Let's tell them the truth." And so Keanu and Miss Clara set out to prepare for the hardest conversation they'd ever had with the book club. They knew that by sharing the truth, they were risking everything they had worked for, but they also understood that it was the only way to move forward, to build something even stronger, something built on trust and honesty. The following week, Keanu and Ms. Clara gathered the members of the book club at their usual venue. The air was thick with anticipation as they set up the room for what was meant to be a celebration of their progress. But the mood was tense. Word had spread that there was something important to be shared, and the members sensed it. When Keanu and Ms. Clara walked in front of the group, there was an electric hush. Keanu's heart pounded as he saw the faces of the people who had become so much more than members. They were family. He cleared his throat, looking out over the room. "We have something we need to share with you all," Keanu began, his voice steady but filled with gravity. "Something we should have told you earlier, and we know it's going to be hard to hear. But we believe that honesty is the foundation of this community, and you deserve to know the full story." Ms. Clara joined him, standing at his side, her hands clasped together. "For the past several months, we've been dealing with something that has been hidden. I was helped at a low point in my life, helped by someone who gave me financial support when I needed it most. What I didn't know then, and what we've only recently learned, is that this person's past is complicated. They were involved in a scandal, and their connections are not what they seemed." The room was still, no one moving. Keanu could feel the weight of their words in the silence that followed. "I want to be clear," Keanu continued. "We didn't know about the shady dealings when we started this book club. We didn't ask for that help. And the person who helped Clara has no involvement with our work here. But we feel you deserve to know the full story. It's important for all of us to move forward with a clear understanding of the truth." There was a pause, and the murmurs began to rise in the room. A few people exchanged looks, some with furrowed brows, others with confusion. Finally, a voice spoke from the back of the room. It was Carol, the member who had walked away from the club months ago. "Is this going to change everything we've built? Is this some sort of lie we've been living under this whole time?" Carol's voice was raw, full of emotion. Ms. Clara stepped forward, her voice firm but understanding. "No, Carol, this isn't about changing what we've built. It's about being honest with each other. It's about showing you that, even in the face of uncertainty, we remain committed to the community we've created together." Carol's face softened, her arms uncrossed as she thought about what had been said. Slowly, she stood up and walked toward the front, where Keanu and Ms. Clara stood. "I don't know what I expected," Carol said, her voice quieter now, "but I do know this. The book club isn't about one person. It's about all of us. And I appreciate you telling us the truth. I'm willing to stay and see what happens next." One by one, other members began to speak, and slowly, the tension in the room started to lift. Many expressed their trust in Keanu and Ms. Clara, acknowledging the difficult decision they had made in sharing such a personal part of their past. The book club would continue, and the members would be there to help shape its future. By the end of the meeting, the air in the room felt lighter. The truth had been shared, and although there were still questions, there was a sense of unity that had been forged through the honesty they had displayed. As Keanu and Ms. Clara stood together, looking at the faces of their community, Keanu realized that the real strength of the book club didn't lie in sponsorships or in the perfect image. It lay in the trust they had built with each other. The truth had come to light, and now they would build something even more meaningful on its foundation. What would you do if you discovered something about a close friend's past that shook everything you knew about them? Would you confront it or try to move past it? Share your thoughts below.